Academica Media. From Academica Media Studios in Miami, Florida, it's Big Ideas in Education, a weekly recap of inspiration and innovation in your schools.
Hello, education lovers. We are overjoyed to have you here this week on our latest installment of Big Ideas in Education. I'm Ryan Kairalla from Doral College, happily joined by Dr. Sarah Boulos from Somerset Academy Schools. Hi, Sarah.
Hello, Ryan, and hello, everyone. It's great to be here.
Where are you in the world right now? Because, that's it looks like it has like a conference room feel to you. I love that you're still podcasting no matter where you are and wherever your travels take you. We love the commitment, but conference room, yeah. Well,
yes, I am here. I am not in Miami. I am in Orlando, Florida, and getting my professional learning on because, we never stop learning as educators. So getting my brain filled with lots of knowledge and ready to drop some for you all.
Lest you all think that we are full-time professional podcasters, and I know we give that off by how incredibly professional this program is, we are working educators. We're out in the world making things happen, and Dr. Phi is an example of that right now in the flesh. Sarah, what story do you have for us this week?
I mean, there are just so many things we could be talking about if I were to talk about things that have changed or gone by the wayside during the pandemic, right? Could be any number of things. But one headline really caught my attention this past week, and it was about field trips. And a lot of people think that field trips are kind of a luxury, if you will, right? Getting to leave school to do things is kind of a luxury. But thanks to new research from BYU, Johns Hopkins University, and the Heritage Foundation, the value of field trips is finally being understood and measured. The study, published in the Journal of Human Resources, found that students who participate in multiple field trips during the school year have higher test scores, perform better in class, and have increased cultural conscientiousness over time. Something that I have some personal feelings about include, this topic of experiential learning. I have been unbelievably blessed and fortunate to work with lots of students. And actually, I'm not sure if I've mentioned it on the show before, but I've actually been able to travel with students outside of the country. And the experiences, just as an educator, that I've been able to have with them and the learning that has taken place that I could have never anticipated is incredible. So this definitely was something that caught my attention when I was reading this. I thought, a lot of times in schools, we see that field trips and experiential learning, we see it as a luxury, as I said. But they say here that contrary to practice where schools facing accountability pressures trade extracurriculars for increased seat time, we found that there's no harm to academics by taking time out of the classroom. And that was from Heidi Holmes Erickson, assistant professor of educational leadership at BYU and lead author of the study. She goes on to say, it's possible to expose students to a broader world and have a culturally enriching curriculum without sacrificing academic outcomes. And it may actually improve academic outcomes. For one, I want to read this study in much more depth, and I don't know, maybe I'll nerd out and bring it back on a future episode of Big Ideas in Education, but it brings a lot of things to mind for me. I'd love to get your feedback on it.
Well, I love it when the data comes out and confirms something that teachers have only been telling us forever, right? And this happens a lot in education where teachers and administrators know stuff from their lived experience, and it's always great when the education scholarship can prove it definitively with data. And field trips having a tangible, positive influence on academic outcomes makes perfect sense to me. And I love that data like this can be used to make it clear that field trips aren't a sacrifice of educational outcomes. Oh, we need to, if we're going to realize the benefits of field trips, we have to be willing to sacrifice some test score performance. And we realize that, and data like this shows that it's not an either or proposition, that these sorts of activities are a positive influence on test scores and outcomes. And to me, that is incredible. And I think it gets back to that old proverb, right? The I see and I forget, I hear and I remember, I do and I understand, right? That is the way to confirm learning, is to give students a chance to actually see these things and happen, to do the learning that they're learning and not just learn it. Of course, that's going to bring positive outcomes in the classroom.
Yeah, and not just the experience of doing something, right? So I mean, I can think of really cool field trip opportunities where kids get to go do something, right? But even just the experience of leaving school, leaving the building, leaving their town, leaving their community, their neighborhood, brings with it learning opportunities that kids may not get in other ways. I have worked with students who live less than a mile from the coast who have never been to the beach, right? I've worked with students who have just never left their neighborhood. And when that happens, there's a lot of experiences you don't have. There are a lot of things you don't see. There are a lot of things that are not a part of your everyday experience. Even something like, I'm going to use South Florida as an example. There's a lot of really great things about living in South Florida. Something that our kids don't always have experience with is like something that I was able to work with my kids on is certain map skills. So we went to another place and we had to use public transportation. Now, my students' experience with public transportation was somewhat limited. We don't have the best public transportation system here in South Florida. So getting on a subway or a metro or something like that, and having to look at the stops on a map, like the amount of math skills and spatial skills and just critical thinking that goes into something that if you live in a big city like New York City or Chicago, that you grow up with those experiences, right? You grow up understanding how many stops I have to go on the subway or something like that. Those are not experiences that my students had because that's not the life they live. So just the experience of getting into another place and seeing these things might be such a difference maker for these students.
And I would surmise that one of the things that is creating positive educational outcomes from field trips isn't just the fact that they're learning content on these field trips, right? Although that's a big part of it, as you identified, Sarah. I think there's also a motivation aspect to it, too. You talked about the student who lived a mile away and had never been to the beach. When you give students an opportunity to see the outside world around them, it instills a sense of purpose in their learning. It's motivating. They get to see what they are striving for. I remember in college, the chair of the finance department at my college would always organize a trip for the finance students to go to New York, to go to Wall Street and, see all the firms there. And it was very expensive for the university. And every year he would have to fight the college to be able to continue paying for this trip to New York. And what he always told us about why he thinks this is so important is he says, I want the students to see what they're trying to get towards. I want them to see that outside world so that it instills a sense of purpose. And so if it's something that makes sense for finance majors at a college, of course, it's going to be 1,000 times more important when you're talking about students in K-12.
And that motivation is huge. And I'd love to spend more time digging into barriers to this, right? Because there's also a huge cost barrier that's there that I think it could be a whole episode, right? Because if experiential learning is providing all of these great benefits for students, how are we going to remove that cost barrier to make sure that students who don't have the funds to go and do this are able to get those benefits? But Ryan, I could talk all day. So I want to make sure you have an opportunity to tell me what you want to talk about today.
Well, I got something pretty interesting to talk about here. And as I was searching for a story to bring up with you this week, Sarah, I could not help but think about the tweet that I think I've seen at least one out of every 20 of Twitter accounts that I follow tweet, which is something along the lines of, boy, I sure miss living in precedented times. Because we haven't lived in precedented times in a long time between what we have been experiencing with the last couple of years of this pandemic and what we have been experiencing just in the last 48 hours as we're recording this podcast right now in terms of the historical events that are happening in Eastern Europe right now. These are These are crazy times, and they are obviously impacting us as grown adults, and you better believe they're having an impact on our students as well. And so I wanted to read more about what we could do to be helping our students process these major historical events, these unprecedented times that we're living in. And last week, Ed Week sat down with the executive director of the National Association of School Psychologists, Kathleen Mink, and got her insight on the roles that teachers can play to help their students process their emotions regarding recent current events. And in the interview, Dr. Mink notes how teachers who see students every day are in a particularly unique position to identify changes in student well-being and behavior caused by these difficult global events, like the pandemic, like the Ukraine crisis. And Dr. Mink notes that if you see a student who seems to be acting out of character, tired, withdrawn, unable to concentrate, it is recommended to reach out to those students, but not to necessarily make assumptions. Say to them something along the lines of, quote, "Here's what I've noticed about you over the last couple days. I'm wondering if everything's okay or if there's something you'd like to talk about." And while teachers are on the front lines in identifying students who are having a tough time, it is important that those folks work closely with school psychologists and counselors to help develop a plan for students who need additional attention. Most importantly, though, Dr. Mink reminds us that our students often take their cues from us. And I'm going to read this quote directly from her interview here because I think it's pretty powerful. This is a quote, "It's not about pretending like nothing is wrong or pretending like this hasn't been an extraordinarily difficult couple of years, but it is about being careful about what you say in front of children so that you're presenting to them your, quote, coping self rather than your own feelings of despair. That should be worked out with other adults, not really worked out in front of children because, again, reassurance and reaffirming students' sense of safety is the baseline of helping kids cope. They need to know that the adults in their lives are managing things, that they're safe, and yes, things are difficult, but we can do hard things." And I'm moved by that statement at the end there, and it kind of gives us a sense of what our obligations are as educators, and also the responsibility we have not to hide the fact that these are difficult times for us, but to make sure that we get the help we need as educators to help us process these difficult times so that we're in a position to help our students.
That is really impactful, and that's really good to hear, and it's so true. I think there's a danger of us putting kids into like one of two camps, that if we don't talk about it, they don't know and everything's fine, right? So I think there's a danger of thinking that if we're not actively discussing something in front of them, that maybe they're not aware of all of the things that are going on. But kids are unbelievably perceptive, and they're picking up, I mean, especially now more than ever with the proliferation of the access to media and content that they have. But we don't want to ignore, in the sense of assuming that if we put on a happy face, kids will not know something is going on. And then there's the other end of that spectrum where we kind of over explain and over front load things to kids, like, I know you're going to be stressed today because of what's going on in the news. And that's not necessarily the case. One, they may not know what's going on. They may sense some anxiety from adults that they're familiar with, or they may have heard things but not understood what they are. They may also see school as kind of an escape, as so many of our kids do, right? They see it as a safe place where, you know what, there is a whole lot of garbage going on. I have no control over it. What I do have control over is just paying attention to my geometry lesson. And I don't want to talk about this right now. So I like the suggestions that were made there. I think that's really a good balance. And I also would say, and this is actually something I just learned at the conference I'm at right now. I don't know if I learned it, but it's something that was repeated. There was a survey that went out about teachers and talking about like social emotional learning and providing resources for students. And an overwhelming amount of teachers in the study, I want to say it was like over 70%, said they did not feel they were equipped to have these conversations with their students. They didn't feel like they had the tools to talk to their students about major things. And it wasn't a major event. It's not exactly what you were talking about, but that really struck me as, you know, when we think the only person equipped to have these conversations with our students is a counselor, we're really not giving ourselves the credit for the amazing relationships that we build with our kids, and the little nonverbal cues we get from them, the little, like, I'm not quite sure what's going on with this kid, but they're giving me a vibe today, and I want to poke at that a little, and I just want to ask, hey, do you need to talk? Is there something that I can help you with? Or do you need a minute? Do you want to go take a walk or get a drink of water and come back? Do you want to write me a note? These little tiny nonverbal, almost intangible things that teachers do every minute of every day are so critical to this kind of, it's almost invisible relationship building, and they compound over time. Those little tiny moments that you take because that little spidey sense of yours as a teacher is tingling, and something's going on with a child, those compounded moments can quite literally save a child's life. And I know that's a big statement, but it is a big effort that's done. And so I would encourage anybody listening as an educator, really think about the power that you have with the students that you have around you. Make your classroom a safe place, a structured place, because there is so much uncertainty and there's so much that we don't have any control over. Do the most for those who are in front of you.
Very, very powerful insight. I'm learning more than I am teaching in terms of this particular subject area, because this is a lot of new things for me, especially because a lot of the students I have now are older and presumably are in a better position to kind of process difficult emotions than younger students are. And so I am grateful for the insight I'm gaining from folks like Dr. Mink and folks from you and other educators that I trust on this subject. And I would love to hear more insight from our listeners and viewers on this. I think this is something where we all just kind of have to get our heads together and talk this out, because this is new for all of us.
Even if you just want a place to process your adult feelings, right, Ryan?
Right.
As you mentioned.
That's right. Let's process it here so that we're ready for our students. Exactly.
That's right.
Tweet at us at Academica Media with the hashtag Big Ideas in Education so that we can hear your insight on these really important stories this week. Sarah, always a pleasure having you with us.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.
The views expressed on the preceding program have been those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Academica, its clients, staff, affiliates, or advertisers.